The webinar has started.
Morning, everyone. I'm happy to welcome you to our webinar, International Developer in Ukraine, Entering the Market. I'm Natalia Kushniruk, the real estate partner with CMS Kyiv office. I'm excited to introduce you to our speakers. So we have with us today Volodymyr Mysak. He is head of capital markets of Cushman & Wakefield. Cushman & Wakefield was the first international real estate consultancy in Ukraine and present in Ukraine since 1994. So Volodymyr will share with us general economic and real estate in particular market overview for the 3 quarters of 2020 and give us share their forecast for the next year, 2021. So we have also with us Maxim Morozov and Viktor Komzyuk, who are both associates with real estate CMS Kyiv team. They will share with us available structuring options for international developers in Ukraine, as well as walk us through the key milestones of real estate objects development. So, Volodymyr, I hand over to you and would be happy to hear from you what the general economic outlook and how COVID impacted the real estate market in particular, and what are the prospects and expectations of the international investors for the next year, 2021.
Yeah. Thank you, Natalia. Thank you, colleagues from CMS, for this great opportunity to participate in the seminar and share our views about economy, about real estate, commercial market. I prepared a brief presentation, which I will start, and this presentation, I hope, will answer to the questions, provide like a general overview of the market in Ukraine, and then make sections for each a particular segment, offices, retail, industrial, of the particular time now. So on basis of that, we will be able to see what's happening on the market and where are we going. But to start with, I will share brief slides about our company. In general, Cushman & Wakefield is a global company, and in Ukraine we have a branch of international office. And as Natalia just said, we are acting since 1994 in Ukraine. We are the first to open the office in Ukraine, and since then the practice continued regularly. We were hoping that we were serving to our clients with the best service. A few statistical slides, I'm not concentrating on them, but just give you impression about our size and the scope and the coverage. Particularly, for instance, the EMEA region where we are located, 37 countries within this region, 108 offices, 6,000 people operate. So I represent the capital markets line in the business. So this particular line is focusing on transactions. So in a daily life, I'm dealing with them either sales or acquisitions. And this is the nice barometer, because as soon as you see that the deals are happening on the market, then you realize that there is a confidence. People on the market see the perspective for the future and they spend money. And those who are selling, they believe that this is the right time to sell. So it's a generally good indicator of the market. So slides about Ukraine, just statisticals again. I'll leave with the presentation so you can follow later. Here is the brief contents of my presentation. As I said, I will start with the economic overview in Ukraine, then focus on office market, then discuss retail market, and we'll finish with the industrial market, which in a way will be a very interesting journey, because the latest market, the industrial market, has very interesting insights for us at the end, especially in this period of COVID. So let's start. economic overview. Yeah. To give you the perspective, or to have a look at Ukraine, we need to sort of have a larger helicopter view on the economy. And in order to understand the potential of Ukraine and to see where Ukraine has been in the last years, it's important to look at the very general but very common indicators, such as a GDP. As you can see, GDP of Ukraine was showing the growth, particularly over the last 2 years. In 2020, it dropped due to the COVID, but it is expected to grow again in 2021. The growth rate represents around 3.5 to 4%, depending on who is the statistical agency and the number and the way it is counted. So the 4% rate is generally very high rate for the Eurozone, and Ukraine definitely, though is not part of EU, is actually showing a very robust growth in this way. With the GDP in the absolute numbers, you can see that Ukraine's GDP is reaching $153 billion, which is quite high, but again, if compared with our peers, is not so significant. There is a way for the country to perform better. Unemployment rate. This is the interesting measure again, because this shows how many people are unemployed and whether the economy is, living good times or bad times. The Ukrainian economy has been always having quite high unemployment rate, and this has been an issue for decades already. And as we can see now, the rate is around 9%. Is it bad or is it good? I mean, it depends, as people say. This opens up some opportunities because Ukraine has a good labor force, educated labor force, and a lot of people who are seeking for the jobs means that it's easier to start business here, especially if you are, for instance, the IT company or if you are a production company. This is the triggers that kind of focus your attention because you have the big labor market. Inflation rates. This was also an important index to watch because typically before the liberalization of hryvnia, typically inflation was happening quite rapidly, and hryvnia devalued against major currencies in a very sort of hard way. Yeah? But since 2016, when the currency was liberalized, we saw much softer approach to currency rates. We saw much softer approach also in relation to the inflation, and you took much more of a control over it. And this now actually offers better opportunities for investors, because when they are looking at hryvnia returns, in particular from the properties that are rented purely in hryvnia, not with the connection to the dollar, they are also feeling more confidence because inflation rate is low, and it allows to actually make returns in local currency. This is the slide which also illustrates the economy, the financial instruments available, the deposit interest rate, lending interest rate, and the real interest rate, which actually is actually calculated by reflecting the real inflation. So as you can see, the real interest rate in 2019 is actually getting closer to the lending interest rate, which means that, and the deposit interest rate, which means that actually inflation is not eating up all the profit that is made by the deposit that is in the bank. In terms of investment, so we were looking at the economy in large, and now I would like to look at particularly in commercial real estate market. As you can see, in 2020, this is the graph that illustrates the investments overall starting since 2007. This is all investments made in the commercial real estate, particularly with the intention to make returns from the rent. Yeah, so we are not counting here the development investments. We are not counting here purchases of land or projects that are still on the way. It's purely into already existing and operating assets. What is interesting here, as you can see, in 2019 the transaction levels were at the level of $370 million US. This was probably the highest year on record since 2008. I'm not counting 2012 here because it was largely one transaction led by one transaction, so it's largely biased year compared to 2008, where you had multiple deals. We were expecting that 2020 will outperform the 2019, but it didn't happen due to the COVID. This was like many transactions were deferred, some were put on hold. Investors and sellers had different views on what's happening and what is the risk assessment. The yields also actually illustrated this shift from more stable environment in 2018. As you can see, they were compressing starting since 2016. They were compressing to 2019, and then they bounced back slightly in 2020. This is just to reflect on the different perception on the uncertainty on the market that happened due to the COVID. And again, coming back to the previous slide, so we can see that at the moment, if we calculate all combined deals, the year result will be, as of now, and as we can see, it will be around 170 million. So it's significantly less compared to 370 million, which was invested in 2018. But this is exactly due to this uncertainty. So that's to reflect also on the hryvnia liberalization. Yes, this is an important part. If you take, for instance, the investor look at what's happening on the market, you see that many of those, typically Ukraine is very much connected to the dollar. Many of those expect that the dollar return will remain stable. So as soon as you have hryvnia is devaluing against dollar or euro, then you can see that immediately investors react, and then they start to price it into the yield or price it into the expectation. Okay, so that's we discussed briefly the general economy and investment volumes in real estate. Now I would like to focus on office market and discuss the trends which exist on the office market. To describe the office market situation, I will be looking at the tenants and basically supply and demand. Yeah, supply from the development and the tenants who are taking the take-up. Who are taking the space. So what's happening here? In brief, the new delivery is pushing the vacancy rate up, and tenants are not so much active due to the COVID. They are deferring the decisions to move into space, expand into space. They are basically deferring it until they see much clearer picture at the end of the tunnel. And that clearer picture is what, internally when we are discussing, we are seeing that this might happen in spring when people, when in general players on the market feel more confidence. There is a vaccine in place, there is less people who are getting infected, and the strategies overall on the global level, particularly for global corporation, are they then looking to be taken for the longer term. So the graph illustrates the supply and take-up. You can see that supply is growing and take-up has been slightly quite modest if you look at the figures for the Q1, for instance, and Q2, Q3. Overall, we were expecting that in 2020 there will be 200,000 square meters delivered to of the new space, and out of that we saw that around 80,000 square meters were only taken from the market, which means that effectively we are seeing the increase of supply and increase of the proposition on the market. That clearly pushes the rental rates, which we see will be further correcting. They are already going through this process of correction and will be probably going through that process during first 2 quarters in 2021, and then they might bounce back and stabilize. Who is this? Who is creating the major demand for offices? We see that this is the IT industry in particular, which takes almost half of the demand. This is the structure of demand. We illustrate it on the basis of 2018 because it has much better sort of representation scale. At the moment, if we look at 2020, this is the strategies are not so defined, and major players, as I said, are deferring the decisions. So we do not see that much of the activity at the moment. Retail market. Again, we will discuss it from the perspective of the occupiers, of the developers and the tenants, and we'll see what's happening there. Obviously, this market has been hit in the most critical way due to the lockdowns. Effectively, retail was the only segment that was banned from operation for a certain period of time in Ukraine and also outside of Ukraine. And that was having the impact on the performance. As you can see, the prime shopping rent on this graph, it was slightly correcting in the way that it was slightly decreasing. But again, we need to understand that in retail, during 2020, we saw many short-term negotiations which were happening between the landlord and the tenant to reduce the rent for the period of quarantine, for the complete lockdown, or for the period of the quarantine when shopping centers were not functioning properly. Speaking about general situation of the market, we see that Kyiv is a city that is developed in the best way. So this means that here we have the most of the supply. We have many projects that are in pipeline to come, and the general availability of retail square meters is the highest in the country. And what does it mean? That Kyiv, it means that basically regional cities offer good opportunities for the developers. And this is where the attention of certain developers is focused now. Some of them are going in the regions to focus and develop the retail there. This you can see that this is the index that we use when we calculate the number of square meters available per 1,000 of inhabitants that are living in the city. Demand, from the point of view, so we can see that Ukraine saw many newcomers during 2018, 2020 that came to the market. We also see that the market that once was mainly franchisee now becomes the market with the direct presence of major retail groups such as H&M, Inditex, LPP, Calcedonia Group, Melon Fashion Group. So now we also have IKEA, which entered the market. So that's a good sign. So the retail is developing, and we see that demand for quality space is there. Basically, it's just that at the moment, what we see during 2020, retailers are not taking long-term strategies with regard to the new project easily. That takes some time to digest before such decisions can happen. And many are working for the pipeline, but deferring the decisions to be made again for Q2 of 2021. Industrial market. Again, we will look on this from the perspective of the supply and demand. I will go a little bit in ahead and say that this market has been the most stable market during 2020. Despite COVID, it showed increase in take-up, increase in demand, and demand came from e-commerce, pharmacy, and grocery. That has been actually easy to predict in a way. It followed the global trend. What's happening here? This market is very unique. It has a very low vacancy rate of around 2% and a quite stable prime rent around $4.5 to $5 for the conventional warehouses. This market offers excellent opportunity for developers to enter because we see that at such a low vacancy rate, there is no space basically for the large occupiers to take. The overall stock of industrial market is around 2 million, and with the 2% vacancy, you can understand that this around 20,000 of space, which is actually distributed among all the projects in Kyiv area, it's very little. So in terms of supply and demand, you can see that delivery in 2020, there was nothing delivered to the market, even though there are some projects that are still under development, but take-up was actually quite good. So in total, we are talking about 110,000 square meters that were absorbed during 3 quarters of 2020. So at the end, by the end of the year, we expect that it will be even more. In perspective, compared to other years, we can see that, for instance, the previous year take-up for Kyiv area was actually higher, but it's not so significantly less because we have only 3 quarters for 2020, so we can still, by end of the year, have this figure on the higher volume. In terms of industrial demand in Kyiv area, this has quite interesting distribution. You can see from the graph that certain areas dominate over the others. This is east and west, as we can put it. So you have demand for industrial space to the west of the city and to the east. The better it's seen actually on this map, you can see immediately that, for instance, this is the western part of Kyiv. You can see how many projects are actually located around this area. And then to the east, you can see that Brovary and Borispol area and other locations popular to the industrial developers. In addition to that, a few words about markets outside of Kyiv here, because for the logistics segment, it's important to understand that not only Kyiv, but also other cities become of interest to the occupiers and to the developers. Most of it, and I would say most of the activity at the moment is happening in Lviv, where we see a new supply, new pipeline of industrial warehousing space scheduled for delivery over 2020-2022, seen as at the level of 400,000 square meters. This is quite a significant number. If you look in perspective. I think I have not said that, but I think it's important to mention that we were focusing in our presentation on the statistics for the offices, mainly for Kyiv area, because this is the most active market and the most illustrative market for this segment. For retail, we were discussing retail shopping centers, like model shopping centers. Most of the statistic was coming from Kyiv area again, and for the industrial also most of the statistic is coming for Kyiv area, but with this small additions for regions in terms of the new supply. This is it from me. At the end of the presentation, you can have the brief vocabulary of the things that are used in the presentation, so you can have a look. Thank you for your attention, and would be happy to answer your questions.
Well, thank you very much for this insightful presentation. So my takeaways are that Ukraine has a huge potential, especially in terms of educated human capital. So due to uncertainty in view of COVID, majority of deals on real estate and retail were most strongly impacted by COVID, and in offices and retail we saw and will see some rent corrections in 2021. So but COVID at the same time boost e-commerce, which grew rapidly over 2020, and we assume will be growing further. So industrial properties were stable, and COVID less impacted those industries. And generally, just a question: what's your anticipation? What's your market outlook for 2021? Are you positive, and you believe the investors will have some positive mood for 2021, and whether you are confident which sectors?
I understand. Yeah, thank you, Natalia. This is, yeah, I share the view that investors will be positive for 2021, and the reasons being are, first of all, I mean, just looking at the 2019 behavior, there was an uncertainty on the market. Obviously, we saw that investors were still having, liquidity. They had equity to invest, but they were just cautious with their approaches because they were not, they couldn't predict how markets would behave. Yeah, they were, this was the new reality that they were adjusting to. And particularly the answer was, for instance, in the Q2 of 2019, we need to see the statistics because before we can make any judgments about what do we do. Then in Q3 of 2019 or 2020, we saw some statistics, and some of investors actually started to act. They started to invest. We saw that if you look at the Q3, on the investment records, you see that there is an activity, there are things happening, deals happening on the market. Many of them were focused on the state as a major seller from the privatization or from the commercial banks or from state property guaranteed fund, but deals were happening, and we saw 170 million at the end of the year. Yeah. Again, now we see some of the shift again to some uncertainty, but I understand now that now there are some positive news on the market. One positive news, there is a vaccine. Second positive news is that companies adjusted to the new reality, adopted some strategies, some shrink space, some expanded if required. I mean, logistics, for instance, retailers also adjusted. So we sort of understand how to deal with that now, yeah? And investors, because some of them, they were taking some hard approach and saying, look, everything has to be discounted, we will apply very high yields. But they see that the owners are not tolerating that, there is no deals happening if they have that approach. So I believe they will focus to the more real and more agreeable terms, and we will see deals happening in 2021 due to the more confident approach from the investor side. Yeah, that's
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your positive attitude. Yeah, and we also anticipate some positive investors' mood. So we are confident that yeah, we will see some positive shifts in 2021. So we're moving to the next item of our agenda. So currently, majority of you may be aware that the construction industry faces a transition period in Ukraine in view of launched construction reform earlier this year. So Maxim will walk us through the structuring of the international developer presence in Ukraine and the major steps and pitfalls of development of real estate objects in Ukraine. And as well as will give his understanding and of impact of the construction reform on the development. So Maxim, I hand over to you.
Thank you, Natalia, and thank you to everybody who find time in your, of course, busy schedule to attend this webinar. Next slide, please.
I will speak a little bit about maybe present CMS. Yeah, Dasha, previous slide, please. Just a couple of statistics about CMS. So we are present in 43 countries and in 71 cities. We have almost 5,000 lawyers globally, and we are the 5th largest law firm worldwide and are the largest law firm in CEE. Next slide, please. This is the pool of our clients, and as you may see, it includes major hotel chains, major energy companies, property funds, embassies, so IT companies. So we have a pretty good pool of clients, which we are very happy to serve. Maxim, go ahead.
Thanks again, Natalia. Today we would like to tell you about the development process in Ukraine, and we will share with you how the development process in Ukraine is usually structured, what is the legal framework for it, and what problems and challenges our clients usually face when dealing with them. We will do some sort of a case study, and we'll describe what should you do to build an object in Ukraine, and we'll also provide with you some examples from our experience. At start, you need to know that the whole process of establishing your presence in Ukraine and building real estate object can be roughly divided into 4 phases, which are first, structuring your presence in Ukraine. This means that first of all, it is necessary to decide how you will be operating in Ukraine, whether it will be directly from your foreign company or through representative office of your foreign company or through sister company, Ukrainian LLC. Then the next thing you need to do is to find partner, because in order to construct the object, you need several partners, namely contractor, designer, supplier, supervisors, and we will talk about it in details later. The first stage is that in order to construct a new object, except for really small one, you need to secure the land plot underlying future construction. And the last but not least is that in order to construct, you need to obtain permit that granting you a right to carry out construction works. And again, we will come back to this later. So let's take a closer look at each stage. Next slide, please. So what should you do first? Well, if you're a foreign developer, this is probably not the first object you are going to build worldwide. So you have your previous experience of working with similar project, you have your team with such experience, you have your business partners, business connection abroad. So when you're structuring your presence in Ukraine, you want to use all these resources as much as possible. So what option do you have? Next slide, please. Next slide, thanks. The first option that most probably come to your mind is to establish a company in Ukraine or even representative office, which will be the developer of the construction and through which you will engage all your already effective foreign partners. Well, at first, it might look like the most straightforward and simple option, because the one thing that really takes time here is establishing company. But right now, it's not possible according to Ukrainian legal framework. And the problem is that the contractor should have a right to carry out construction work in Ukraine. And here we need to make a small stop to discuss this, that in order to have a right to construct the object right now, contractor should have a license. License is a document that confirms that the contractor as a company have enough employees, have enough experience, have enough material base to construct a specific type of the object. And this is how it has been working before, and it is how it is working nowadays. But this spring, the construction reform has started, and instead of such licenses, the new system was introduced, which is certificates of individuals, of foremen. And this means that according to this reform, contractors should employ such foremen, which should hold relevant certificate. But again, there is problem with that because unfortunately the reform had started but not yet finished. So right now the licenses are no longer being issued, so you cannot obtain them. And the certificates are not yet issued, so you also cannot obtain the certificates. So we are in a kind of transfer period when you still require a license to carry out construction works, but you cannot obtain one. So right now we're really waiting for this to change. To summarize it, is that in order to realize this option, you will have to have Ukrainian customer, whether LLC or representative office of foreign company. You also need to have a contractor which have relevant license right now and latest certificate. So basically, you need to wait until the end of the transfer period. But if you do not want to wait and you want to start the construction right away, there is other option. Let's look at that. Next slide, please. The other thing you can do is you can purchase a company contractor with an effective license. There is such offer on the market right now, and such option already being used plenty of times, even before this construction reform has started, just for the sake of time, because usually obtaining license is quite difficult and long procedure. So contractors tend to make it quicker just by purchasing shares in a company that already have a relevant license. So in general, this option is pretty the same as the previous one, except for the contractors part, where again you're buying already effective Ukrainian company. The only problem here and main thing to keep in mind is before purchasing a company, we really recommend to carry out extensive financial and legal due diligence. Well, this recommendation also applies to any company you're going to buy, but for construction market, it is really important because sometimes they can have some history, sometimes they could have some financial debts, some difficult financial relations with other companies. So this is really strong recommendation of ours. Next slide, please. And the last option is really simple on paper. We really have not much to say from the legal perspective, that you can find Ukrainian partners. You can find Ukrainian contractor with a license. You can find Ukrainian project designer and start working together. Generally, all three options we just discussed covers almost all possibilities we have now, but there could be a lot of further details, like in which form you're going to operate in Ukraine, whether it will be sister company or representative office of your foreign company, what jurisdictions your foreign partners are located, and this will significantly affect your tax structure and how you're going to structure the contract system between involved parties, whether it will be one EPC contract covering every aspect of the construction, or it will be one agreement for supply, one for construction, one for design. And In general, there's a lot to discuss in details, but generally there is these three options. Next slide, please. Here you can see brief comparison of representative office and limited liability companies in Ukraine, which are two most popular and most efficient ways to structure your presence in Ukraine. And usually foreign developers choose limited liability company, since it is easier to establish it, it's easier to operate, it has lesser amount of limitation in its activity. So usually limited liability company is the better choice. But representative office is also have some pros, like it could employ foreign employees without obtaining special permits, while limited liability can't. And there could be some pros also in the process of obtaining license, because a representative office can rely on foreign company experience and material base while applying to the authority for obtaining license. Next slide, please. Here we're going to the second major steps is establishing business connection with the partners required for a development process. And to start working with your project, you need a number of people to work with. It could be whether from your structure or whether your partners you find, but the main are the designer. This is a personal company who should develop a project design of the construction, and it should have certified architect or engineer in its staff. The next one is contractor. In Ukraine, there is a system that customer of the construction engage the general contractor, while general contractor engages all other contractors, subcontractors. And all general contractors and all other contractors right now should have license, but again, as mentioned, it could be changed in future, and it will be required to have certificated foremen as employees. The next person is author supervisor. This is a person that supervising over the construction process to check whether actual constructions comply with the decision in the project design. And usually author supervisor is the designer or the person appointed by the designer. And no specific certificates or license or any other documents are required for author supervisor. Next person is pretty similar. It's technical supervisor. Also, it's a person that supervises over the construction to check whether the constructions comply with technical standards and rules of Ukraine. And this person need to have specific certificates of the technical supervisor. Next person is supplier, just for supplier of your materials, of equipment necessary for the construction. And there's no specific requirements for supplier. It could be also a company located outside of Ukraine, but in such case, you need to know that you will face some additional customs and certification questions. Well, and for this, you really need to have a certification specialist. This is not someone you always need to have, but especially if you're supplying something outside, you need someone who are working with certification of equipment, who are working with custom issues, and there's no, again, specific requirements for such persons. This is just your advisor on such issues. And that's pretty it for the persons, for the list of persons you need to have. But again, depending on the project, depending on the structure of your business, this list could be broader. Next slide, please. Well, this is a third main stage of the construction process, when you already structured your presence in Ukraine, and when you establish necessary business connection, or even before it, you need to secure rights to land underline your future constructions. In Ukraine, it could be both ownership and lease, and even some other kind of rights. But in general, these are lease and ownership. And land in Ukraine could be privately owned or owned by authorities, mainly by municipalities and the state of Ukraine. And usually, most part of Ukrainian land is privately owned, but this land is for agriculture purpose, and you cannot generally use it for construction purpose, because in most cases you cannot change the designated use of such agricultural land. So most likely you will have to choose state or municipal land. And also it should be noted that private land, agricultural land, mostly located outside of settlements and far away from crucial infrastructure you may require for your object. So most likely you will have to choose state or municipally owned land. And acquiring such land requires an allocation procedure. This means that usually state and municipal land is not legally formed, is not registered as a real estate object, the boundaries of the land is not established, and in order to do so, you have to apply to relevant authority, you have to develop management documents. It's documentation that contain boundaries of the land plot, its designation use, limitation of its use, and some other technical information. And this documentation should be also approved by relevant authority. And usually it's quite a long time. This could take around 3-4 months, like it could be even more depending on where you're going to acquire this land and what the system of focus is authority and etc. So this could be a really difficult process. For private land, it's much more straightforward because if the land is already owned or leased, and if this land is already established, it has its boundaries, the process is really straightforward. It's just shaking hands and signing the contract. Next slide, please. And when you are choosing the land, there are plenty of things you need to consider, because land plots could have a lot of defects, either of technical or of legal nature. We strongly recommend carrying out legal and technical due diligence before acquiring any land. And just to illustrate this, we want to share some examples of our experience of our clients, like situation we faced just during the last couple of years. For example, one of our clients acquired the land, 90% of which were waterlogged. So the construction was significantly more difficult on this land, and it was possible to spot it, but it wasn't. So this is just one example. The other one, that in almost every project we see engineering systems located on the land. It could be ammonia pipelines, other pipelines, underground power lines, etc., etc. And sometimes it makes the project almost impossible to construct due to technical reasons, or it could significantly affect the location of the construction. And it could also add some administrative step, is that in order to construct within the zone of such system, you have to obtain the permit from the operator of such system. The next example is in several projects we faced. Usually it's in south of Ukraine, where wind power plants and such projects are usually located. We find that a lot of burial mounds located on the land plot. And this could also affect the construction because according to Ukrainian law, you cannot construct near the burial mounds in a way that could affect such burial mounds. And it could also provide some additional administrative steps to go through. The next example is that, again, in many projects, we found not only underground systems, but also some protection zones around this or some other objects. And again, these zones, sometimes it could make impossible to construct your objects, and sometimes it could significantly affect and every time you need to obtain special permit to construct within such zone from the operator of relevant object. Yeah, and again, this in almost every project. And the last example we want to share is not so widespread, but also should be noted that sometimes the cadastral map contains some technical mistakes about the land, about the boundaries of the land. And it could lead to potential disputes with the neighbors of the land. And it could also, again, obviously affect your project. And this is just several examples we shared, and there's much more defects of the land plot that you could face. And again, we didn't even touch their legal problems, such as history of transfers of land, some defects in land management documentation, etc. And we are just provided this illustration for that it is possible to spot all these potential problems even before you acquire such lands. How? Next slide, please. Well, again, it is possible to spot all potential defects, and you need to do just several steps to do so. And what we usually recommend in such cases is first to carry out extensive legal and technical due diligence. Again, it is pretty obvious that in case you're purchasing some expensive real estate piece of object, but there could be a problem here that your technical legal advisor could not have enough information, because sometimes the seller is not sharing everything, sometimes publicly available information is not complete. And in such case, there are the recommendation applies, which are communicating with local and land resources authority. With local architect and local land resources authority, because such person usually have access to some old documentation, some old maps of the land plot. They're aware of what's up with the engineering system of the land plot, and usually they tend to operate with potential developers. And this is really important contact we strongly advise you to have. And also, we also recommend carrying out geodesic and geologic survey of the land, because in such way you could obtain some up-to-date information, and you could also provide such information for your legal and technical advisor to carry out more tailored due diligence. And it also would help your project designer while developing the project. And that's pretty it with the first three stages, which are rather of a preparation stage. And we come to the construction itself. And here I would ask my colleague of mine, Victor, to continue from that point.
Thank you, Maxim. So we are starting with the construction itself. It should be noted that all objects of construction are divided in three categories in Ukraine based on the consequence class called CC1, 2, and 3. Based on this complexity and the categories, the permitting procedure varies for each of them. For the first one, it's typically less complex procedure, while for the second and third, it's more complicated. We will touch upon this later. As a way of examples, first category in significant construction mainly consists of small private houses, but it also can contain such objects as solar and wind power plants in case they do not include substations. For CC2, it typically includes warehouses or medium apartment buildings. It also can contain some more significant objects, but for the third categories, mainly it's either large residential buildings or it's some production or industrial facilities. And next slide, please. So regarding the overall timeline and overall step plan, the designing in construction is based on three pillars. First is the town plan conditions and restrictions. Second is design assignment. And the third one is technical conditions. Town planning conditions and restrictions is a document which is issued by local architecture bodies, and mainly it consists of limitations to dimensions of the building. So it can contain limitations of maximum height of the building or the percentage of use of the land plot. Technical conditions are issued by the providers of utility services, for example, operator of gas pipes or electricity networks. It basically says what requirements should your object comply with to be able to connect to these networks. And the third one is design assignment. In the design assignment, the customer of construction overlays to the construction company what should be designed and what should be procured and constructed. Subsequently, the project designer develops the design itself based on these three pillars. In cases of more complex construction, the project design shall also undergo expert review. This expert review is procured by either private or state employed experts. And subsequently, after the design is developed and the expert review is procured, if this is required, the next step is obtaining construction permit or notification for the commencement of construction works. The construction permit is obtained for the categories consequences classes 2 and 3, while the notification is submitted for the easiest construction, less significant one. With the notifications, the state authorities cannot reject it if all the documents are filled in correctly, so you don't need to receive a construction permit for less complex construction. Subsequently, the construction itself follows, which is followed by the commissioning and title registration. The commissioning is also depending on the categories of the construction, but mainly on the initial document. Different commissioning procedures apply if you obtain a construction permit or if you submit a notification on the commencement of construction. Next slide, please. So let's talk more about project design. What is it? It is developed by certified engineers in Ukraine. Even though you can employ your foreign architects and engineers, designing in Ukraine should be supported by Ukrainian qualified engineer who will oversee all this project. This is because the construction should adhere to numerous local state construction norms and requirements and local laws, which will probably your foreign architects will not be aware of. Still, the foreign employees can be part of the construction and design team. As this design undergoes expert review, as was mentioned, expert review is procured in up to 30 business days, and this period can be extended for more complex construction, but usually it takes less. As project design are developed either in 1, 2, or 3 stages. For the least complex construction, it's only staged in one document. But for the most complex construction, it should include feasibility study, basic design, and the detailed design. And additional requirements for project designing are raised in case of state-funded projects. In case it's funded by state, potentially feasibility study can be required. If it's in other cases, it's not. It should be noted that the project design can be adjusted on any stage, also if the construction was commenced already. In case the project design was subject to expert review from the beginning, then additional expert review should be procured for these amendments only. The timeline is the same. It's up to 30 business days, can be more, but typically it takes several days if you do not introduce some material adjustments to the project design. Next slide, please. So a few words about the construction team, who it consists of. First one is a design company. It designs the project itself, but it also has a say in the subsequent construction path, mainly by appointing author supervisor. Author supervisor is somebody who oversees the construction, is procured as design, while the technical supervisor is an engineer who oversees the construction and verifies the equipment which is used is of high quality, materials are decent quality, and basically all construction norms and standards are adhered to within the construction site. And the main, of course, is the construction company. This is the company who performs the construction itself, employs required personnel, and leases required equipment. Next slide, please. Few words about the construction contract. Construction contract in Ukraine is typically extensively regulated. The state requires over 20 essential conditions to be included in the construction contract, some of them which are outdated, like sources of funding and some requirements of insurance of construction. But construction contracts can be governed by foreign law in Ukraine if one of the parties is a foreign company. And also it can be FIDIC based. We typically recommend clients to procure construction contracts which are governed by foreign law, but also we recommend using FIDIC templates for more complex construction. We will talk more about FIDIC based construction contract. Next slide, please. So what should be noted about FIDIC contracts in Ukraine? Despite it's regulated by foreign law, Ukraine has an extensive regulation of state construction norms and standards and the mandatory requirements to construction. Without regard to the clauses of the contract itself, it should be adhered to and it should be noted. Potentially, based on what we see from our perspective, FIDIC templates should be heavily adjusted to be effective for Ukrainian construction. One of examples would be acceptance of works. FIDIC templates contain somehow standard clauses of how works are accepted, but in Ukraine the procedures are not so straightforward. One of the examples is accounting documents, so-called Acts KB2 and KB3, which are signed only to evidence the price of works, but it also can be treated as an acceptance of works. If the customer of construction signs this certificate, it means he agrees with this price, so basically he agrees with the scope of works. That's why it should be regulated in FIDIC template and it should be adjusted to our realities. Even more complicated case is a FIDIC in state-funded projects or projects funded by international lenders. Typically, it is required to procure FIDIC-based construction contracts, but state procurement regulations are very extensive and very severe. Some examples would be the most obvious one is project adjustment. In a lot of cases, a developer believes that the construction should be adjusted, and it's actually a best case scenario for both parties. With regard to state-funded projects, the adjustment after the project is commenced is quite hard. So it should be accounted for in the FIDIC-based contract, and still we want to leave some option to adjust it, but we should make this mechanism work. And next slide, please. So what is the typical structure? What is the typical timeline? All starts from obtaining initial data for project design. It's three pillars I mentioned before. Subsequently, when initial data for designing is obtained, 4 agreements are signed. One is with the construction company, second with the technical supervisor, third with author supervisor, and fourth is with the design company. This agreement should be completed and executed before the customer of construction applies for the construction permit. Second stage is application and obtaining the construction permit or filing the notification on commencement of construction. And subsequently, companies procure agreement on supply of equipment and materials, but it also can be executed on an earlier stage. After the construction is finished, as the facility is commissioned under the law and it's ready for operation. Next slide, please. So what main permits are required for the construction? Of course, the main one is either the construction permit or notification on the commencement of construction. But what additional permits are required? Some permits are quite typical for every construction. One of them would be permit for carrying out hazardous work or permit for carrying out using hazardous equipment. Even though it sounds harsh, but the hazardous work would be treated any works on height. So if you have any employees working about 2 meters from the ground level, you will need to have this permit. And hazardous equipment, it's the same. Even autoloaders would be considered as hazardous equipment. So you should have persons who are specifically trained to work on this equipment, and you need to obtain this permit. Another example is permit for topsoil removal. It is a bit outdated requirement, which is typically neglected by Ukrainian construction company, but nevertheless, administrative, civil, and even criminal liability exists for meeting obtaining this permit. If the topsoil layer of ground is removed, it should be stored and it should be recultivated after the facility is destroyed, even if it's after 25 or 50 years, and a special land recultivation project shall be developed. Some other permits also exist. I want to stop on the environmental impact assessment. In case the construction has a potential impact on the environment, the procedure of environmental impact should be procured, and typically it should be procured on the initial stage of designing before applying for a construction permit. So it should be accounted for in the project timeline, that unless this environmental impact report is prepared, public hearings are heard on this environmental impact assessment report, the construction will not commence to this stage. Next slide, please. So all in all, we have 4 main issues. First is choosing the structure you want to operate. Second is choosing the defect-free land. Third is obtaining initial data. And the fourth one is obtaining all permits and approvals. When you pass this 4th stage, you are clear to go and you can commence the construction. It's all for us. We would be happy to answer your questions if you have any, and we are thankful for your attention.
Thank you, Victor. So just to sum up, general development process is not very straightforward, but once you have properly structured your presence in Ukraine, once you choose reliable partners and advisors, allocated proper land and preliminary done the due diligence, both legal, technical, and environmental, and proper scoped the work for all the contractors, and obviously if you took some additional time for permitting procedures and scoped some additional time for unforeseen circumstances such as our construction reform, you will be lucky to develop the project, and we will be more than happy to support you through this journey. So, dear speakers, I'm very grateful for your insightful presentations. This is all from us, because we already used all our time. I also want to take this opportunity to wish you the season greetings. I wish to all of us prosperity, health, happiness, and peace in 2020. And thank you all for joining us today. And we'll be more than happy to see you on our next events. Thank you.
Thank you.